St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. Welcome to the refuge of St. Joseph, a space of silence, faith, and healing, where every minute is cared for with tenderness. Here, we learn with the silent guardian to transform ordinary life into prayer and to trust in providence. If this refuge speaks to your heart, please like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel to walk with us. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. Tonight, let the scene be simple. A wooden bench, a square of soft light, the scent of fresh shavings in a quiet room. You have walked far to arrive here, carrying worries you rarely name aloud, carrying questions that ache in the ribs where the breath grows thin. Perhaps your heart rehearses unfinished conversations. Perhaps your mind loops through what-ifs and almosts. You are not late. You are not lost. You are here, and the humble workshop of Joseph receives you without judgment, without hurry, without the need to pretend. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. There is a kind of fatigue that noise cannot heal. It is the strain of being strong in front of others while feeling fragile within, the strain of holding a family together, the strain of working with dignity while wondering if the effort matters. Your body knows this weight. The shoulders rise and harden, the jaw sets, the breath shortens and becomes a visitor instead of a friend. Let your breath return to you now, not as a command or a test, but as a gentle permission. Allow the inhale to arrive like morning light, and allow the exhale to lengthen by a heartbeat more, as if dusk were settling across a quiet field. When the exhale becomes longer than the inhale, the nervous system receives a message that it is safe to land. Muscles soften, the mind gathers itself, and in that softening a path may appear that force could never find. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. Joseph knows this language of quiet. He does not thunder. He does not rush. He does not perform. He listens, and in listening he becomes strong. The Gospels say little about his words, yet speak volumes about his presence. He hears a call in the night, and before dawn, he rises. He takes the child. He protects the mother. He chooses the road that love requires, not the road that applause rewards. His silence is not absence. His silence carries direction. His silence is an open door through which God's will enters the house. Joseph's silence is an invitation to listen to the heart of God. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. I know the tug of war inside you. Part of you wants answers written in the sky. Part of you longs to stop the spinning and simply be held. Part of you is tired of being brave. Part of you is afraid to stop being brave in case everything falls apart. Let both parts sit down here, side by side on this worn bench. Feel the wood under your palms. Feel its steady truth, its quiet honesty. The bench is not trying to impress you. It simply bears your weight. Tonight we will learn to bear our own weight with that same quiet honesty, to stop hiding from our need while also refusing despair. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence, not as a slogan to silence pain, but as a rhythm that carries pain toward meaning. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. If you pay attention, you may notice the small signals of mercy arriving in the body before they arrive in the circumstance. A breath that reaches deeper than usual, a tiny unclenching under the eyes, a warmth in the chest that was not there a moment ago. These are not theatrics. These are the first steps of peace, the body's way of telling the soul, you are permitted to hope. Spiritual life is not a flight from our humanity. It is the grace that saturates our humanity with purpose. What begins as a longer exhale becomes a clearer thought. What becomes a clearer thought becomes a quieter choice. What becomes a quieter choice becomes a safer home for those we love. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. You may be carrying a disappointment that feels older than you, a pattern that repeats, a fear that wakes in the night like a child looking for a light. We will not scold this fear. We will not indulge it either. We will name it, and we will place it into hands that know how to hold without breaking. Joseph's hands are carpenter's hands, calloused, steady, precise. He does not crush the fragile edge of your trust. He shapes it. He does not hurry the grain. He reads it and works with it. He honors the wood's direction, the hidden lines that only patience reveals. This is how healing begins, not with grand gestures, but with a faithful touch that respects the material of your life. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. There is a difference between noise and truth. Noise is urgent, restless, and always hungry. Truth does not shout. It shines. Noise shakes the ladder. Truth strengthens the rung. Noise promises power. Truth offers peace. When you live surrounded by noise, you begin to doubt the whisper that raised you when you were small, the whisper that said you are not alone, the whisper that said your life is not an accident, the whisper that said love will meet you where you are. Tonight we settle into that whisper again. We let truth be the slow light that finds the corners. We let truth be the hand on the shoulder that does not leave. Joseph stands beside us in this, a father who guards rather than controls, who protects rather than parades. Joseph's silence is an invitation to listen to the heart of God. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. Notice how the room feels when you choose gentleness toward yourself. The temperature changes. The clock seems to loosen its grip. What you thought required a miracle may require a series of small obediences, each one possible, each one real. Joseph teaches this art. He takes the next step without needing the 10th. He trusts that obedience opens doors which explanations cannot. He does what love asks of him within the day he has been given. You are not asked to carry the whole journey tonight. You are invited to take the next step in truth, the next step in love, the next step that honors your soul and the people entrusted to your care. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. Before we go further, gather one intention quietly, like a candle cupped in your hands. It might be a person, it might be a decision, it might be a sorrow that has not yet found its name. Let your breath wrap around it. Let your exhale carry it toward the heart that already knows. If it helps, imagine placing a small folded paper beneath the sleeping Joseph, not to avoid responsibility, but to entrust what you cannot control. The body loosens when the soul surrenders what does not belong to its strength. The mind clears when the heart releases what it was never meant to grasp alone. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence because providence is not distant. Providence is the nearness of God arranging good in ways we cannot yet see. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. Now as the workshop quiets even more, I ask you to allow a simple prayer to form. Not loud, not elaborate, just honest. Here I am. Teach me to listen. Guard those I love. Choose one line and let it repeat with your breath, a rosary made of air and intention. Feel how repetition steadies the mind, how cadence calms the alarm within, how humility opens the door that pride kept locked. This is not self-hypnosis. This is the wise choreography of body and soul learning to move together again. In this gentle beginning, clarity is already approaching. In this gentle beginning, courage is already gathering. In this gentle beginning, hope is already working under the surface, like yeast in the dough. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. When we rise from this bench, we will carry a quieter strength into the next part of our time together. Not a strength that denies weakness, but a strength that walks with it and guides it. Not a strength that performs for approval, but a strength that serves for love. If all you do tonight is breathe more kindly and name your intention truly, that is not small, that is the doorway. Joseph will walk with us through it. We will learn from his listening. We will learn from his obedience. We will learn from his fatherly heart that knows how to shelter without smothering and how to correct without wounding. Joseph's silence is an invitation to listen to the heart of God. And as we proceed, remember this. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence, and with St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. There is a hum that grows louder when the world grows quiet, a restless current that runs beneath even peaceful rooms. Many hearts call this hum by other names: worry, vigilance, readiness, but it behaves like noise inside the soul, and that noise numbs prayer. Spiritual hurry joins it, pushing thoughts to sprint while the spirit limps behind. Together they create a fog, attention scatters, memories of God's fidelity fade to a thin outline, and even familiar prayers feel like words placed on a conveyor belt. The body registers this fog first. The shoulders carry what the mind denies, the jaw guards what the heart fears, and the breath forgets its own rhythm. In such moments, prayer does not fail. It simply struggles to be heard over the machinery of self-protection. Joseph's quiet enters precisely here, not to shush emotion, but to lower the volume of inner engines that do not need to run all night. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. The silent factor that sabotages faith rarely announces itself. It wears the costume of responsibility and calls itself necessary. Yet beneath the noble face of diligence, there can live an urgency that never receives permission to rest. The nervous system interprets this urgency as a signal to mobilize. Cortisol rises like a tide. The amygdala tightens its watch. The mind hunts for threats, even during prayer. When vigilance refuses to stand down, conversations with God become briefings instead of communion, planning sessions instead of presence. The heart does not stop loving in such seasons. It simply forgets how to trust while it is bracing. Joseph's way suggests another economy of strength, a steadiness that guards without clenching, a readiness that remains open to direction, a labor that breathes. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. Unmet expectations complicate this interior weather. Hope had a shape, a healing by a certain date, a reconciliation with a predictable arc, a door that looked promising and then closed. The soul tried to be reasonable, tried to be patient, yet disappointment settled in like evening mist. The mind, hungry for a verdict, whispered that providence might be indifferent or late, or simply moved on to other concerns. This is the moment when doubt feels less like rebellion and more like fatigue, not a raised fist, but lowered hands, not anger, but a slow erosion of warmth. And here too, Joseph stands as witness that providence is not a clock to be managed, but a presence to be trusted. He receives direction in the night and rises into obedience without a press conference, and in that movement, the Holy Family is sheltered. Joseph's silence is an invitation to listen to the heart of God. The soul learns over time that expectation and hope are not the same species. Expectation sketches the route and demands compliance. Hope opens its hands and waits for God to be God. Expectation measures timelines. Hope remembers covenants. Expectation insists on explanations. Hope recognizes direction. This distinction matters not only theologically but physiologically. The body that lives on the edge of exact outcomes stays braced, while the body that consents to be led begins to release the brakes it had kept on for safety. As the prefrontal regions regain the microphone from alarm, clarity returns in small increments. One thought steadies, one feeling softens, one memory of fidelity brightens. The shift is subtle, like dawn trading places with night, but it is real, and it is how providence usually moves, quietly, faithfully, fruitfully. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. A gentle reset often begins with truth spoken in a low voice. Fear has a name, and it is allowed to be named without shame. When fear is acknowledged, the body stops negotiating with a ghost and begins relating to a guest. The vagal brake engages. The heart learns again that it can arrive instead of rush. The mind recovers the freedom to notice grace where it had only tracked loss. In that softened field, something holy draws near, the sense that prayer need not impress God to reach God, that love meets us where we actually are, not where we pretend to be. Joseph's workshop becomes a symbol of this reset. No spectacle, only presence, no hurry, only fidelity, no noise, only the cadence of hands that know the worth of ordinary wood. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. Some discover that when fear is named, breath follows suit and finds its proportion again. Exhalations lengthen by a quiet margin. Shoulders, relieved of their silent assignment to hold the world together, sink by a few millimeters. The gaze widens. This is not performance, not technique for its own sake. It is cooperation with the way God knit body and soul. When the body signals safety, prayer can remember tenderness. When prayer remembers tenderness, trust remembers its own address. The soul that had been guarding every doorway can once more notice who is already in the house. Providence has not abandoned the room. Providence has been waiting in the room. Joseph's silence makes that waiting visible. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. Inner noise tries to persuade the heart that meaning arrives only with big answers. Quiet teaches that meaning also arrives with small obediences. The psyche, when overwhelmed, tends to swing between overcontrol and collapse. Joseph models a third way: attentive steadiness. He does not manufacture certainty. He listens for instruction. He does not escape responsibility. He carries it with reverence. He does not explain the road to everyone. He simply takes the child and goes where love indicates. This posture calms the system because it replaces the fantasy of mastery with the reality of mission. In mission, the nervous system finds a pattern it can trust, receive, respond, remain. Joseph's silence is an invitation to listen to the heart of God. There is mercy in discovering that providence does not require numbness to exist. It welcomes feeling and directs it. Tears need not mean failure. They often mean truth is touching a place that has waited a long time to be seen. Trembling need not signal collapse. It can signal thaw. The soul that stopped expecting consolation can be surprised by the way consolation returns, through simple nearness. The nearness of God, the nearness of a trusted saint, the nearness of a story that dignifies struggle. When consolation returns, it does not always change the plot immediately. It changes the posture with which the plot is carried. Shoulders no longer pretend to be the foundation of the world. Hands no longer try to hold what belongs to providence. Heartbeats align with a quieter drum. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. And as this chapter closes, a truth rises with the consistency of sunrise. Faith is not the absence of noise. Faith is the courage to let noise lose authority. Spiritual hurry will still knock. Unmet expectations will still test their weight against the door. Fear will still ask its questions at inconvenient hours. Yet the house does not belong to them. The house belongs to God, and Joseph stands by the doorway, not as a bouncer against emotion, but as a father who keeps the threshold safe for love to pass through freely. The path ahead will not be walked alone. The next page will not turn without grace already waiting on the other side. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. There is a phrase that sounds like a doorway creaking open in the pre-dawn hush. Eat. St.joseph, go to Joseph. It is not a slogan, it is a family memory, a path the church has walked with confidence when resources ran thin or nights stretched long. The words carry the warmth of a trusted address, the kind you whisper when the heart is tired of proving itself and longs instead to be held with wisdom. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence, and that trust does not erase need. It honors need by bringing it to a Father who knows how to receive it without spectacle, without panic, without shame. Joseph's silence is an invitation to listen to the heart of God. The church speaks of Joseph with titles that sound like shelter: patron of the universal church, protector of families, guardian of workers, consolation of the dying. These names are not decorations. They are addresses on the map of mercy. Patronage, in the language of faith, is not about celebrity or distance. It is about proximity that safeguards. When a home trembles under strain, when work feels like a daily crossing over rough water, when a hospital corridor stretches longer than courage, when farewells gather like clouds, the church recalls Joseph's fatherhood and leans into it, not to bypass responsibility, not to defer what belongs to human love, but to acknowledge that human love stands steadier when a fatherly grace stands beside it. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. The hidden power of Joseph's intercession rests in a paradox that feels deeply human and quietly divine. God delights to act through humble guardians. Delegated authority is not a downgrade, it is a choreography of love. Children learn to walk by holding a hand that is not God's and yet is given by God. The Holy Family moved across deserts under the guidance of a man whose strength arrived precisely because he listened. To ask Joseph's help is not to dilute prayer, it is to enter the economy of communion where love multiplies by being shared. Heaven does not fear intermediaries when the intermediary is fatherhood. Heaven invented fatherhood for this very reason. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. Consider how the heart relaxes when safe authority draws near. The body recognizes it, the breath loosens, the skin around the eyes softens, the chest widens by a small mercy. Neuroscience describes this as co-regulation, the nervous system borrowing calm from a trustworthy presence. Spiritual life describes it as intercession, the soul receiving steadiness from a holy companion. Both point toward the same mystery. Peace often arrives before answers, and in that peace the mind can notice guidance it had been too alarmed to see. Joseph's presence works like that, unassuming, stabilizing, precise. It is not a blaze in the sky, it is a hand on the threshold making sure the way is clear. Joseph's silence is an invitation to listen to the heart of God. St.joseph also remembers another Joseph, the son of Jacob, who fed the hungry in a famine he had not chosen, whose fidelity turned injustice into provision. The resonance is more than literary, it is sacramental in tone. When resources thin out, bread, energy, patience, providence often answers by raising one who can steward the little with reverence until abundance returns. In the New Covenant, that steward stands beside Mary and the child as a gentle wall against ruin. The famine may look modern and wear different clothes: emotional dryness, fractured households, precarious work, late-night despair, but the answer still arrives wrapped in fatherhood that does not control, in obedience that does not humiliate, in protection that does not smother. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. There is a humility to this path that heals the soul where pride had kept it brittle. Asking a saint's intercession does not declare incompetence, it declares belonging. Belonging changes the interior climate. The amygdala, so quick to scan for danger, receives the message that it is not the only guardian at the door. The prefrontal regions, so often drowned by alarm, regain the space to weigh, to listen, to choose with clarity. Theology and neurobiology both nod here. Safety, true, moral, fatherly safety, makes wisdom audible. Under that safety, the heart recovers its memory of God's reliability, not as a theory but as a history retold in small, luminous details. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. Many have discovered that Joseph's help is rarely theatrical and almost always practical. A job arrives not as a windfall but as a door that fits the hinge of one's gifts. A conversation that had calcified softens, not by debate, but by a word chosen with reverence. Our deathbed becomes a threshold marked by tenderness rather than terror. These are not headlines, they are sacraments of the ordinary, grace threaded through the seams of daily bread. Joseph's fatherhood touches them because his holiness lived there, in sawdust and sweat, in journeys taken for love's sake, in nights protected by obedience that did not need applause to keep watch. Joseph's silence is an invitation to listen to the heart of God. If a question lingers, why ask anyone but God? The answer stands in the very heart of Christian faith, where love binds us into one body. Intercession is not a detour, it is communion in motion. When a friend says, "Remember me," and a heart replies, "I will carry you," something holy passes between them that mirrors heaven's own generosity. Saints are not rivals to God's care. They are its radiant echoes. To involve Joseph is to agree with God about the dignity of human participation. It is to honor the way grace prefers to meet us, person to person, presence to presence, fatherhood to child. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence. What emerges over days and years is a relational confidence that does not shout and does not fade. The soul learns the feel of being guarded without being controlled, guided without being pushed, corrected without being shamed. Anxiety begins to find fewer reasons to sprint. Despair finds fewer shadows in which to hide. This is how delegated authority becomes healing rather than threat. It reflects the heart from which it was given. The result is a life that works with God rather than performing for God, a life that receives help without apology and offers help without superiority. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. And so Go to Joseph becomes less a crisis plan and more a daily address, a way of moving through the world that keeps fatherly care near the surface of ordinary hours. The workshop remains modest. The doors remain open. The square on the table reminds hearts how alignment feels in the hand. Not everything is solved here. Much is carried here, and carried well. The Church, wise with centuries of tears and triumph, keeps returning to this quiet room for a reason. Here trust is taught without humiliation. Here courage is grown without noise. Here providence is encountered not as a theory, but as a presence that chooses to arrive through a father's steady love. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. There are nights when the absence of words feels like a locked door, and the mind presses its ear to the wood, searching for proof that someone remains on the other side. In such hours, silence can resemble distance. It can wear the mask of neglect. Yet the gospel keeps placing Joseph in rooms like that, rooms where explanations do not arrive and decisions still must be made. And every time, silence becomes shelter rather than exile. The quiet that seems empty at first is, on closer listening, dense with direction. It does not abandon, it protects. It holds the flame away from the wind long enough for trust to breathe. Joseph's silence is an invitation to listen to the heart of God. The difference between abandonment and protection is not always visible from the doorway. Abandonment leaves a person to fend for themselves. Protection draws near without stealing the person's dignity. Abandonment withdraws in indifference. Protection remains in reverent reserve. Abandonment forgets. Protection remembers. The heart learns this difference the way the body learns the feel of a safe room. The shoulders lower by a few imperceptible degrees. The gaze widens. The pulse steadies. It is the physiology of being kept, the quiet knowledge that a threshold is guarded while freedom is honored. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence. Joseph's silence is not a refusal to act. It is action made possible by listening. The scriptures do not record long speeches from him. They record footsteps in the right direction, a message in the night, and then a movement before sunrise, a warning given, and then a road taken. The text offers a sentence that carries the weight of a lifetime. He rose and did as the angel commanded. There is no drama in the phrasing, only fidelity. That line becomes a doorway in the soul through which courage can pass, a pattern of response that does not require certainty to begin, only the recognition of God's voice. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. There are seasons when God withholds explanations to give direction. Explanations satisfy the intellect and keep the heart where it is. Direction reorients the whole person toward where love needs them to be. Explanations answer why. Direction answers where and how. Explanations soothe the appetite for control. Direction strengthens the muscle of trust. The path of faith often grows in this soil, where reasons are thin but guidance is thick. The mind may still long for a map. The soul begins to recognize that a father walks beside, and that walking with a father is safer than walking with a map alone. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. Peace, in this way of living, often arrives before answers. It comes as a change in climate rather than a change in headlines, a softening under the breastbone, a relief that does not yet know the outcome and yet knows it will not be alone inside it. Neuroscience might call it a shift towards safety. Prayer calls it consolation. The fruits are recognizable. The room feels wider, resentment loosens its grip. The imagination stops rehearsing catastrophe long enough to recognize grace when it knocks. These are not techniques. They are the early blossoms of providence in a field that had been winter for a long time. Joseph's silence is an invitation to listen to the heart of God. Recognition grows with practice, and recognition changes the story we tell ourselves about the quiet. Where the heart once narrated absence, it begins to narrate guidance. Where the mind once measured delays as defeat, it perceives timing as care. The body, no longer braced for the worst, starts to register small gifts as evidence rather than accident. The unexpected tenderness in a conversation, the door that fits the hinge of one's vocation, the strength to carry a duty without bitterness. Nothing spectacular, everything essential. Under this reframing, silence becomes a canopy, a way God shields the seed while roots take hold. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. To stand under that canopy is not to be spared hardship, it is to be spared meaninglessness. Hardship without meaning exhausts. Hardship with meaning matures. Joseph's road carried risks, deserts, and midnight flight, and yet the narrative is not framed as panic, but as guardianship. His presence steadies the scene. His obedience makes room for salvation to move through ordinary human choices. This is the quiet reversal that heaven loves. The world expects clamor to save. Heaven lets a father's listening guard the king. The surprise of heaven is not spectacle, it is fidelity. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. Some silences teach, some silences shield, some silences heal. The silence that teaches forms the conscience. The silence that shields preserves the good from premature exposure. The silence that heals wraps what is raw until it can bear the light. Joseph's life carries all three. He does not announce every grace that passes through his hands. He does not force what has not yet reached its hour. He does not pry at wounds to prove a point. He stands, and in standing, he keeps a holy space around the mystery he has been asked to protect. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence. Here, trust shifts from a theory into a posture. The soul is no longer bargaining with God for explanations. It is consenting to be guided by God toward love. The heart is no longer measuring the silence by the volume of its fear. It is measuring the silence by the faithfulness already shown. A single remembered mercy becomes a lighthouse for the next stretch of coast. A single act of obedience becomes the hinge on which a family's safety turns. He rose and did as the angel commanded, reads like a sentence. It lives like a shelter. Joseph's silence is an invitation to listen to the heart of God. And so the quiet that once felt like distance begins to feel like nearness of another kind. A nearness that does not crowd, a nearness that does not demand, a nearness that makes space for grace to ripen. The door remains guarded. The room remains free. The heart learns to breathe inside this paradox until the paradox becomes home. Providence is not late here. Providence is exact. Love is not hiding here. Love is working with exquisite restraint. In such rooms, hope remembers its center and courage finds its feet. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. There is a way of living that turns ordinary hours into a quiet sanctuary, a way in which prayer does not interrupt work, because work itself begins to speak the language of prayer. It looks simple from the outside. Doors opened, tasks tended, faces greeted, and yet inside it moves with a cadence that Joseph knows well. Receive, respond, remain. In this cadence, the soul stops chasing greatness and starts consenting to goodness. The body recognizes the pattern, heart rate steadies, attention settles. The nervous system learns that holiness can wear the clothes of routine without losing its radiance. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. A day often discovers its center by remembering its origin. Some hearts wake with a word that has carried them for years, a brief entrustment that fits on the breath and opens the window of the will. Others light a memory of God's fidelity, a single story that tells them who they are before any task begins. The point is not to manufacture a mood, but to anchor identity, beloved before productive, guarded before exposed, called before consumed. Under this memory, choices feel less frantic. Expectations loosen their grip. The prefrontal mind has room to notice grace and choose wisely. Joseph's silence is an invitation to listen to the heart of God. Across the day, work approaches like a visitor at the door. It can be welcomed as a burden or received as a trust. When labor is received as trust, effort becomes reverent rather than desperate. Our carpenter's bench teaches this without speaking. Measure slowly, honor the grain, let the tool meet the wood with enough pressure to shape and not enough to scar. In human terms, this is stewardship. Tasks are not tests of worth. They are places to love with precision. The soul that honors this discovers a coherence between inner and outer life. Anxiety spends less time inventing catastrophes. Attention returns to the person in front of us and the task at hand. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence. Evenings have their own music when a home remembers them as a sanctuary rather than a collapse. Many discover that the heart tidies itself by reviewing the hours with tenderness, moments of light named as gifts, moments of fracture named without harshness, a simple desire for the next right step offered into the care that never sleeps. This review, brief, honest, unafraid, does not scold the day, it gathers it. Neuroscience recognizes the benefit. Memory consolidates, threat responses downshift, and the body prepares for rest with a story that ends in safety rather than unfinished alarms. Joseph's silence keeps watch here as well, steady as a lamp in a window, patient as love. Some paths of devotion become bridges when words feel thin. The 7 sorrows and joys of St. Joseph form such a bridge. Sorrow does not disappear in these meditations. It stands beside joy the way shadow stands beside flame, each giving the other its shape. The heart that lingers over these paired mysteries learns to read life with both eyes, one that honors ache without dramatizing it, and one that welcomes consolation without clutching it. Over time, a memory of balance forms, grief and grace held together in God's hands, not fought over in ours. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. Homes sometimes keep a small statue of the sleeping Joseph nearby, a quiet sign that providence also works in ours when hands are still. Slips of paper rest beneath it, not as magic, not as abdication, but as a witness that human limits are not failures. Night becomes a covenant. Effort has its dignity, rest has its faith, and God is faithful in both. Physiology nods along, muscles loosen, the immune system repairs, neural pathways prune what is no longer needed, and strengthen what is. The soul senses that relinquishment is not the opposite of love, it is the way love lasts. Joseph's silence is an invitation to listen to the heart of God. When this rhythm takes root, even interruptions evolve from enemies into thresholds, a ringing phone, an unexpected need, a detour that steals time. Each can become a place where love reorders the script without tearing it. The amygdala's alarm quiets more quickly because the heart is no longer defending an empire, it is serving a kingdom. Service is lighter than empire, service is freer than empire, and service under Joseph's fatherly gaze becomes the art of noticing who is in the room and what mercy looks like for them today. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence. The dignity of work shines brightest when it guards the people work is meant to serve. Joseph's craft built shelter for the Holy Family, but his vocation was larger than wood and nails. It was the protection of a sacred story unfolding in real time. Every honest labor partakes in that protection. Food prepared with attention, budgets handled with integrity, classrooms tended with patience, hospital rooms dignified by presence. These are not lesser offerings. They are altars concealed in plain sight. Over such altars, a quiet blessing often lingers long after the task is done. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. Hidden practices weave this fabric. A pause at thresholds, a soft word where sharpness once stood, an apology offered before resentment grows roots, a gratitude named before the light goes out. None of these are grand. All of them are real. They are the hinges on which doors move without squealing, the small courtesies by which a house becomes a refuge. The nervous system learns to expect safety in such places, and where safety is expected, generosity rises almost without effort. Joseph's way protects this atmosphere with gentleness, sturdy enough to outlast storms. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. In time, the rule of life ceases to feel like a rule at all. It feels like friendship with the day. Morning does not accuse, it invites. Tasks do not threaten, they belong. Evening does not judge, it embraces. And in the spaces between, a fatherly presence accompanies without crowding, corrects without humiliating, and guides without noise. The miracle is not that everything becomes easy. The miracle is that everything becomes meaningful. The heart knows where it stands. The hands know whom they serve. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. On the bench there is a square, cool to the touch. Its right angle a quiet promise that lines will meet in truth. The square checks alignment. It does not argue, it reveals. Hearts know this tool by another name. Conscience illumined by grace, attention warmed by love, will steadied by trust. When thoughts, affections, and actions begin to angle away from one another, fatigue spreads like a hairline crack through wood. Prayer feels misfit, work feels scattered. Relationships creak. Joseph's fatherhood draws near not as inspection, but as companionship, the kind that brings measure without humiliation, clarity without noise. He helps align will, thought, and action with God, gently, faithfully, precisely. Joseph's silence is an invitation to listen to the heart of God. Alignment is more than correctness. It is peace wearing the shape of coherence. The mind, no longer chasing every signal, returns to what is true. The heart, freed from competing allegiances, leans toward what is good. The body, unburdened by double lives, cooperates with what is beautiful. This does not erase conflict or erase grief. It simply gathers the person into one direction so that conflict does not become identity and grief does not become compass. In the school of St. Joseph, the square in his hand reads the grain of a day, the angle of a decision, the pressure of a word spoken in haste. The square does not shout, it rests against the edge and lets truth appear. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. Shavings on the workshop floor tell a small luminous story. They fall quietly, curling like parchment strips, and almost no one notices them. Yet they are the record of transformation. Each curl a fraction of what did not belong, each sliver a relinquished excess, each soft spiral the cost of making something fit, durable, true. Hidden sacrifices shape saints this way. A sharp reply set aside, a private resentment allowed to thaw, a generous attention offered where distraction once ruled, no applause, only the low hymn of fidelity sung in hours that pass unnoticed. Over time, these shavings pile into a tenderness that can hold weight. Joseph's way honors them, not with fanfare, but with the steady confidence that nothing surrendered in love is lost to God. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. There is a scent to these quiet offerings, the faint sweetness of wood warmed by labor, the clean trace of effort that neither despairs nor demands a stage. The nervous system, so often trained by urgency, begins to trust rhythms like this. The breath deepens without being ordered to. The jaw loosens without being commanded. The gaze widens because the soul no longer polices every doorway. Coherence has this effect. When the interior angles square with truth, energy that once leaked into pretense returns to presence. This is how hidden sacrifice becomes visible strength, not through spectacle, but through the capacity to bear love steadily. Joseph's silence is an invitation to listen to the heart of God. Hinges and doors explain the mystery with humble eloquence. A hinge is small, almost overlooked, and yet the whole door relies on its quiet precision. If the hinge is true, the door swings with grace. If the hinge is crooked, the door resists and groans. Many lives discover that the hinge moments, those small choices made out of sight, carry great weight. A door opens toward patience because a hinge of forgiveness was set straight the night before. A door closes against temptation because a hinge of honesty was strengthened in a conversation that could have drifted toward disguise. Joseph's fatherhood resembles this hinge, small in noise, mighty in consequence, the quiet peace without which the house cannot welcome or protect. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. In rooms where hinges are true, doors both open and guard. Welcome has its strength, boundaries have their tenderness. The soul feels this as an interior architecture, compassion without collapse, conviction without cruelty, openness without naivety. Alignment makes such architecture possible because it removes the wobble that fear tried to correct by force. Heaven's geometry appears. Right angles that do not cut but support, edges that do not wound but define, planes that meet and hold a weight larger than any single board could carry. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence, and providence loves to build with joined pieces, lives linked by fidelity, families strengthened by shared truth, communities hinged by hidden prayer. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. The square returns to the board again and again, not because the craftsman doubts, but because love measures more than once. Conscience does this also. It checks the edge after fatigue, after success, after sorrow, because each season can introduce a subtle warp. No condemnation, only care. A thought realigned toward mercy. A desire realigned toward justice. An action realigned toward integrity. Such recalibration preserves freedom. The heart remains spacious when the angles hold. The mind remains luminous when the edges meet. The body remains at ease when nothing essential is pretending. Joseph's silence is an invitation to listen to the heart of God. Alignment turns even thresholds into teachers. The doorway itself becomes a sacrament of belonging, leaving without severing, returning without retreating. A person can carry this doorway within, arriving to work without abandoning prayer, returning home without abandoning mission, resting at night without abandoning hope. Hinges bear the movement. The square ensures the frame. The door fulfills its purpose. This is not metaphor for metaphor's sake. It is a way of naming how grace grants stability in motion, stability that does not paralyze, motion that does not scatter. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer, and when misalignment appears, as it will in every human story, the answer is not panic but presence. The square rests against the edge again. The hinge receives a gentle tightening. The door lifts slightly on its pins until the latch meets the strike with a soft, satisfying click. Hearts know that sound, the quiet assurance that things hold. Under Joseph's fatherhood, such corrections feel like dignity rather than defeat. Truth comes near without shaming. Order returns without crushing. Peace resumes its subtle occupation of the room. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence, so the workshop sings in its unassuming way. The square gleams with use. The shavings gather like a small snowfall of sacrifices. The hinges do their work without complaint, and doors open to those who need shelter. This is how alignment looks when it chooses our days. Steady, warm, resilient. Not everything becomes easy. Everything becomes ordered to love. The soul stands upright without rigidity. The mind bows without losing clarity. The body serves without erasing itself. Joseph's silence holds the scene like a mantle, and in that mantle every step finds its angle, every offering finds its place, every home learns the art of welcome that keeps truth and tenderness in the same room. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. The room grows kind around the edges, and something within recognizes a time that does not rush. A single intention rises from beneath the day's noise, as if it had been waiting behind the door, patient as morning. No display, no effort to impress heaven, only honesty taking its first unguarded breath. Words gather slowly and without pressure, simple and durable, the sort of words that have carried generations. A name offered into care, a need offered without disguise, a gratitude that refuses to disappear. Joseph's silence is an invitation to listen to the heart of God. A prayer begins to take shape the way light collects on a windowsill, almost unnoticed at first, then unmistakable. It does not ask the soul to pretend strength it does not possess, nor does it demand weakness as proof of sincerity. It simply tells the truth. Here is love, here is fear, here is the road as it is. In that truthfulness, the body finds its own gentler rhythm. Breath no longer knocks at the ribs, it settles. The pulse releases its grip. The space behind the eyes loosens. This is not performance. This is belonging returning to its seat. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence. Some discover that a single line repeated softly within carries more than 100 arguments. Here I am. Guard those I love. Teach my heart to listen. The lines do not strive, they keep vigil. Repetition becomes a kind of shelter, a rhythm steady enough for the soul to lean against. The room feels wider, not because anything has changed outside, but because something has calmed within, an interior threshold now watched over, a custody of the heart that does not tire of its post. Joseph's silence is an invitation to listen to the heart of God. Memories of fidelity arrive like small, careful lights along a path. The moment strength returned when it was most needed. The conversation that softened when a tender word appeared from nowhere. The protection that stood between a fragile hour and a great undoing. These memories are not random. They are stitches in a garment Providence has been sewing for a long time. The mind that had rehearsed catastrophe begins to rehearse gratitude. The nervous system, tuned for threat, notices safety with equal clarity. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. There is a tenderness to the night when trust stands watch. The world rests, and a quiet assurance remains awake without anxiety, as if a lamp were left in a window for those still on the road. The custom of entrusting written intentions to Joseph, especially in the image of his sleep, feels close to this tenderness. Not a bargain, not a superstition, but a confession of limit that honors how God works while hands are still. Effort retains its dignity. Rest keeps its covenant. Love continues in both. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. Peace often arrives before answers, and its arrival changes the way questions are held. Under peace, the heart does not clutch at outcomes. It receives direction. Under peace, imagination stops searching for exits and begins searching for the next faithful step. Under peace, time no longer threatens. It becomes the field where promises ripen. The soul learns to stand with open hands, neither demanding a sign nor refusing one, ready for whatever grace chooses to become visible. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence. As quiet deepens, the day seems to settle into a shape that can be blessed. Light and shadow stand side by side without competing. Failures no longer define the story, and victories no longer demand a stage. The truth of being held becomes the truest thing in the room. Even sorrow breathes differently here. It is not banished or dramatized, only accompanied with a patience that does not flinch. Joseph's silence is an invitation to listen to the heart of God. A subtle courage gathers where resignation once stood. It does not boast, it does not hurry, it does not announce itself. It simply stands, the way a father stands at a doorway, through a long night without calling attention to the watch he keeps. This courage gives permission for tomorrow to arrive without dread. It frees the will to consent to goodness again. It allows love to carry more than fear predicted. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. What rests now is more than the body. What rests now is the story. Not because the story is finished, but because the story has been returned to the one who knows how to write it with mercy. The bench holds its quiet wisdom. The square cools beside the lamp. The hinges keep their patient truth, and the door remains ready for morning. Nothing spectacular, everything essential. Providence has not withdrawn. It has drawn near in a form the soul can bear. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. It is strange and beautiful how an ordinary room can feel altered by what the heart finally believes. The bench is the same. The square the same, the hinges the same, and yet something has shifted, an unseen weight set down, a truer center found. The world beyond these walls will still ask its questions, and yet the soul senses it will not be answering alone. Providence has drawn near in a father's steady way. Quiet as dawn, faithful as bread. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence. Memory returns like a careful archivist, laying out evidence of mercies that did not announce themselves at the time. The narrow escape that now reads as protection. The delayed timing that now reads as precision. The conversation once feared that now reads as healing. When such memories accumulate, fear loses its authority to predict the future, not because threats vanish, but because love's history becomes undeniable. Joseph's silence is an invitation to listen to the heart of God. What had seemed like fragments begin to belong to one another. The labor that once felt invisible, the prayers that seemed to dissolve into the air, the small renunciations no one applauded. Together they form a living pattern, a geometry of grace where edges meet without injury and corners hold without strain. This pattern does not erase sorrow. It gives sorrow a house with doors and windows, a place where light can enter and breath can return. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. The heart, steadied by gentleness rather than force, recognizes a different kind of courage, quieter, deeper, less impressed by noise. It does not require spectacle, it requires fidelity. It does not chase reassurance, it notices guidance. It does not demand to be seen, it desires to see rightly. Under this courage, choices regain their dignity. Saying yes regains its clarity, saying no regains its mercy. The soul that once braced against life begins to stand inside life, guarded yet free. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. A word rises that once felt too small to matter and now feels like a key in the lock. Enough, not as resignation, but as reverence for limits shaped by love. Enough strength for today. Enough light for the next faithful step. Enough grace to hold wounded places without turning them into weapons. The nervous system, relieved of the demand to see the end from the beginning, rests into the cadence of receive, respond, remain. This is how hope endures without pretending. Joseph's silence is an invitation to listen to the heart of God. If there is a sign tonight, it is not fireworks. It is fruit. A little more patience where impatience once ruled. A little more tenderness where defensiveness once kept guard. A little more honesty where performance once wore the crown. Such fruit ripens slowly, often unnoticed until someone else tastes it and names the sweetness. Heaven's work prefers this pace because it honors the person becoming holy, not just the result being achieved. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence. The Holy Family's story, carried on the back of obedience and guarded by listening, becomes more than a page in Scripture. It becomes a template for a human life that is neither escapist nor cynical. It is possible to protect what is sacred without violence. It is possible to serve what is ordinary without contempt. It is possible to walk through risk without surrendering to panic. The proof stands in a workshop, in a journey by night, in a home where God learned the timbre of a father's voice. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. There is room here for those who have wandered and those who have waited, for those who feel late and those who feel unfinished. Nothing essential has been lost. What matters most has been preserved in hands stronger than fear. The view ahead may still curve out of sight, yet it is enough to know that love stands at the threshold, a guardian who asks for no fanfare and keeps a lamp lit all the same. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. And now, as the door of this hour draws near its soft closing, one question remains, a question that does not accuse, that does not rush, that does not measure you against anyone else. Where is Joseph inviting alignment to become action and action to become love in the very next ordinary moment that carries your name? A hush lingers in the room as if the wood itself has learned how to keep faith. The hour has carried its share of ache and of light, its share of questions and small answers, and something within recognizes that none of it has been wasted. The bench has held its steady welcome, the square has kept its quiet truth, the hinges have borne their hidden labor, and the door, patient as always, has waited for the right footsteps. Providence feels close in this stillness, not as spectacle, but as a presence that understands the long work of the human heart. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence. A life begins to look different when guarded, rather than driven. The same streets, the same names, the same duties, yet an interior atmosphere shifts from scarcity to shelter. The mind that once raced begins to read the day with gentler eyes. The heart that once braced begins to recognize signs of care where it had only tracked threat. Nothing forced, nothing staged, only the rediscovery of a father's nearness inside ordinary time. Joseph's silence is an invitation to listen to the heart of God. What seemed fragile starts to carry weight. A small fidelity holds, then holds again. A relationship breathes where it once held its breath. A decision no longer needs the noise of certainty because it has learned the sound of trustworthy guidance. The body honors this new terrain, pulse easing, gaze widening, shoulders releasing millimeters of unnecessary armor. Peace shows itself as a way of standing, a way of speaking, a way of staying. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. The memory of this hour will not depend on eloquence. It will return through textures and traces. The cool edge of the square, the faint sweetness of shavings, the quiet swing of a well-hung door. It will return through sentences that do not tire. God is near. Love endures. Help has a father's voice. In that remembrance, discouragement loses its power to rename the story. The deeper name remains: beloved, kept, accompanied. A tenderness for limits takes root where contempt once grew. Limits are no longer enemies to defeat, but contours through which grace chooses its path. Enough strength for what is given, enough light for the next step that is real, enough mercy to hold the unfinished without turning it into guilt. Here, dignity and humility stop arguing and begin to live in the same room. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence. There is room now for gratitude that does not ignore grief, and room for grief that does not eclipse gratitude. The soul learns to carry both without tearing. The Holy Family's way makes sense of this. Protection without hardness, obedience without humiliation, courage without display. The promise buried in such a way is quiet but resolute. The promise that love outlasts fear and teaches time how to serve redemption. What remains is simple, the kind of simple that took a long time to become true. The heart knows where to lean, the mind knows when to listen, the will knows whom to serve. The day is not an enemy to survive, but a field where goodness can ripen. Providence, once suspected, stands revealed as patient artistry, measuring, joining, shaping, blessing. If a blessing could be heard in this room, it would sound like footsteps steadying, like a latch finding its home, like a father's breath easing in the quiet after a long watch. Not a command, not a performance, only presence that keeps vigil and keeps faith. Joseph stands near, not to replace what must be carried, but to carry what should never be borne alone. Joseph's silence is an invitation to listen to the heart of God. The hour draws near its soft ending, yet nothing essential closes. The lamp still keeps its window-lit promise. The bench still offers rest for those who arrive later. The door remains ready for morning. The story continues under a mantle that does not fray. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. The room holds a stillness that feels like a hand gently resting on the shoulder, and the heart understands that what it has received tonight will travel with it. The bench where worries sat has learned the weight of trust. The square that once seemed merely precise now looks merciful. The hinges that carried 100 turnings sound like a music the soul has always known. Nothing in the world beyond has changed, and yet everything within has been given a truer name. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence. There is a way memory begins to glow at the edges when it is held, not judged. Scenes that once felt like failures return with a quieter light. They do not recite accusations. They reveal survival, fidelity, and a thread of meaning that was hidden in the moment of strain. The mind that once edited the story to highlight loss discovers footnotes of grace, a voice that steadied, a door that waited, a kindness that arrived almost anonymously. Under this light, Dignity reappears in places it had been missing, and the heart breathes with fewer reasons to hide. Joseph's silence is an invitation to listen to the heart of God. That invitation keeps echoing even when streets are loud and schedules lean hard against the hour. It echoes at sinks and desks and sidewalks, in hospital elevators and school parking lots, in kitchens where the clock keeps up its faithful counting. The echo is not an order, it is an address. It calls the soul by its true name, and reminds it that presence is greater than performance, fidelity greater than display, and love greater than noise. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. What seemed small has revealed its depth. A pause before a word becomes a gatekeeper for peace. A glance of compassion becomes a shield against despair. A moment of quiet at day's end gathers hours that might otherwise scatter. These are not easy triumphs, they are steady mercies. The body knows the difference. Heart rhythms that no longer sprint for no reason, shoulders that no longer pretend to be the walls of the house, a gaze widened enough to notice beauty without needing to own it. Such mercies do not clamor, they remain. There are thresholds that will ask courage, and courage will come in the shape it wore tonight. Not bravado, not denial, but a willingness to carry the next faithful step with clean hands. Providence rarely floods the whole map with light. It lays a lamp along the path and keeps company while the path unfolds. In that company, even uncertainty loses some of its teeth. Confusion softens into inquiry. Delay ripens into timing. The soul discovers it can walk without dragging the future behind it like heavy luggage. The house that lives within, the interior place where choices are weighed and love decides how to move, has grown quieter, not because it has fewer rooms, but because it has more light. Anger and tenderness can now sit in the same space without tearing the furniture. Grief and gratitude can share a table without one devouring the other. The sound that rises in such a house is not silence as emptiness, it is silence as welcome. Joseph stands near that welcome like a father by the door, present without hovering, available without insisting. If a sentence could be kept in a pocket for the road, it might be this: God is not late where love is learning to listen. The sentence has weight because it was learned where wood meets hand, and hand learns patience. It settles the breath when the day tightens. It steadies the will when choices multiply. It keeps the soul from casting votes for despair in moments when despair would like to count itself as wisdom. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence. Houses become refuges when someone tends them with quiet fidelity. Lives become refugees in the same way, not through perfection, but through a pattern of returning. Returning to what is true, to what is good, to what is beautiful. Returning to the address where help has a father's voice. There is room in such a life for the weak and the weary. Room for laughter that needs no permission. Room for sorrow that need not apologize. Doors open and close as they should. Hinges bear the weight without complaint. Thresholds keep their gentle watch. And so the heart steps toward the evening with a companionship that can be trusted. The bench will remember. The square will still be cool to the touch. The hinges will keep their patient song, and the door will be ready again in the morning. Providence continues its careful work, not by overwhelming but by indwelling. Joseph's silence continues to teach without a lecture, to protect without display, to guide without noise. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. The room stands as it began. Bench, square, hinges, door. Yet it is different because you are different. What the heart has learned here has a weight that the world cannot steal, that silence can protect without abandoning, that providence can be exact without spectacle, that ordinary hours can carry a holiness sturdy enough for sorrow and bright enough for joy. Joseph's silence is an invitation to listen to the heart of God. There is a trace the soul recognizes when it has been guarded rather than driven. The shoulders remember how to lower, the breath remembers how to arrive, the mind remembers how to notice goodness without clutching it. The workshop's language has become your own. Receive, respond, remain. Receive what is given, respond with fidelity, remain under love's watch, not as orders, but as recognition. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. What once felt scattered has found its frame. The carpenter's square returned to the edge again and again until the angle held. So did truth return to your story, until coherence emerged. The shavings on the floor, hidden sacrifices, quiet renunciations, unadvertised tenderness have become the record of a transformation that did not need a stage. Hinges, small and steady, now bear doors that open and guard with the same grace. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence. Memory lends its evidence gently, a protection you only noticed afterward, a timing that proved wiser than your plan, a word that softened what could have hardened. Each recollection a thin thread, together a garment. Providence has been stitching longer than fear has been speaking. The discovery is not that life is painless. The discovery is that you are not abandoned within it. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. The Holy Family's path has left a map for human courage that does not need clamor to be real. Guarding can be tender. Obedience can be dignifying, strength can be quiet, and still move mountains that no shout could budge. This courage does not erase vulnerability. It converts it into room for grace. Peace arrives before answers, and in that peace the next faithful step becomes visible enough to trust. Joseph's silence is an invitation to listen to the heart of God. If there is a signature of this hour, it is mercy without drama, enough light for the next step, enough strength for the task at hand, enough love to keep the door of the heart from slamming shut. The body knows this signature, the soul does too. Not everything is solved, everything is held. Not everything is clear, everything is accompanied. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer, so the door stands ready. The bench keeps its welcome for those who come after. The square cools in the lamplight, a quiet promise that truth can be checked without shame. The hinges wait for morning, certain that turning and returning are both part of love. Providence remains near, not as interruption, but as indwelling. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence. And before you go, let the final question rest in the place where courage listens. Where is Joseph inviting alignment to become love in the very next ordinary moment that carries your name? St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us.